Hello, and we're live. Hello, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. I'm your host, Katie Halper, and we have a great show for you guys today. We're going to be talking to Ron Kim, a New York assemblyman who is fighting the good fight, and a way that you know you're fighting the good fight is when Andrew Cuomo threatens you. He does all sorts of great work also, in addition to getting Andrew Cuomo angry, and he's going to be talking to us about the way that Cuomo covered up nursing home deaths, and that's a really important story, and it's getting so little attention. Not the cover-up, but the reasons why he had to cover these numbers up in the first place. And we're also going to be talking to David Sirota, who has done really important investigative journalism work around this very subject.
Hey there.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. How are you?
I mean, it's a stressful week.
Yes, yes.
Within 1 week, they try to rope me into Cuomo's world of lies multiple times, privately, on a phone call, publicly, and then we exposed, everything. And within a week, it just happened so quickly, right? Like they had his top aide. We had a private meeting with 6 lawmakers, and then she accidentally told the truth. She slipped. It was like in the movie A Few Good Men, when that Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise. I was actually thinking of that movie when this was going down. Like, she had all the scripts. They're going the scripts. The commissioner, there's a commissioner, all the excuses, and my colleagues are like, well, just keep interrupting. That's not true. Like, what happened here? What happened here? And all of a sudden, she's like, you want the truth? I will tell you the truth.
Really? Did she say something comparable?
That's what I heard. Like something very similar.
Got it, yeah.
Yeah. You can take it or leave it. This is the truth, nothing but the truth. And then she goes into saying that there was political football and we didn't know what data to give because it was going to be used against Andrew Cuomo. And everyone was like texting. It was a virtual phone call, right? So people were texting, did she just commit? Did she just incriminate herself? Like, all the red flags went up. And in that moment, it was no longer a private discussion. She incriminated all of us in that moment.
So can you set this up a little bit? You're in a private meeting. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So this was the meeting to go over a list of questions that we submitted at an August oversight hearing around nursing home deaths 6.5 months ago. They were supposed to get back to us in 2 weeks. Stonewalled, nothing, no communication. And then there's Attorney General drops a bombshell report in January. All the stuff, David, you and I talked about, validated in a report on legal immunity, the underreporting, the profit motives. She just dropped this report. And I got a report. They called me at 8 a.m. that morning when I got the report, and I cried a little bit because I felt like David and I were the only ones like screaming and people weren't paying attention. And that report came, and that led to them being forced to release all the numbers. And before they did that, they gathered us up for a private meeting trying to alleviate the tension. We're going to do this. We're going to answer all your questions now. In the middle of a 2-hour session, the Secretary of the State had that moment where she actually accidentally told the truth.
David, you want to respond to that?
The quote from Melissa DeRosa, Cuomo's top aide, was when asked about by the legislators, why did you not release this information? Was, quote, we froze because then we were in a position where we weren't sure if what we were going to give to the Department of Justice or what we were going to give to you guys, she's speaking to the legislators, to you guys, what we start saying was going to be used against us while we weren't sure if there was going to be an investigation. So legislators, Ron Kim being one of them, we're trying to sound the alarm about this. And to be frank, the budget passed in April, in which Cuomo put this corporate immunity provision into the law. It took a couple weeks for people to wake up to it because, it's a giant budget bill. It funds the whole state government in a very big state. People like Ron were sounding the alarm. We reported out the story based on Ron pointing us to it, and we did our own independent reporting on it. And, I think everybody needs to understand just how extreme the measure was that was put into the state budget. And just as an aside, having to slip it into a state budget instead of passing it as a standalone bill, granted, like that may be tradition, but what that ends up preventing is a sort of fully aired out public debate. In other words, that wasn't an accident. If you want to put really nasty things into law, one tactic would be to put it into a giant 5,000 page bill, a moving train kind of bill, a must pass bill, so that the whole debate is about the entire state budget. It isn't about your one provision. Now, so the point in saying that is that it sort of creates the idea of motive here. In other words, what's put into that bill, the provisions like this, it's not an accident that they're kind of buried in the fine print. And in the case of this immunity bill, what we learned was that the major group that pushed this bill, that in fact said and touted and bragged that it drafted the provision, was one of Andrew Cuomo's top donors. More than $2 million of money from this group, the Greater New York Hospital Association and its lobby firms, flowed to Cuomo's political machine in about the year and a half leading up to this situation. And then that group, the Greater New York Hospital Association, bragged that it had drafted a provision that the Cuomo administration put into this giant budget bill, really slipped into this giant budget bill. And here's what the provision said, and this is why it's so important to look at the actual language, which is to say that the language said that not only are frontline physicians, nurses, frontline healthcare workers granted a level of significant immunity from potential lawsuits from people who feel like they were mistreated or families whose family members were killed during COVID because of bad business practices. It actually then also explicitly said that the corporate executives, board members, and other corporate officials of the nursing homes, the nursing home companies, they are also immune. They are also shielded from potential lawsuits. And as the New York Attorney General's report has now subsequently said, and what we reported at the time was, what that does is that removes a deterrent to corporate malfeasance. That the threat of private lawsuits is the major deterrent to a corporate executive who maybe runs a nursing home, who's thinking, I can provide spend extra money to provide adequate staffing, protective equipment, and all sorts of other safety measures. I can spend adequate money to increase those protections, or I can maximize profits. I can cost cut to maximize profits in ways that potentially jeopardize people's lives. That a threat of a lawsuit is the deterrent to making the unsafe decision. And that when you effectively, preemptively immunize the corporate executives from potential lawsuits, you are saying to them that the decisions you make to maximize your company's profits that may endanger elderly people, may endanger, frankly, frontline healthcare workers themselves, that those decisions, you will not have to worry about facing consequences. And so that's why this is so important. This is not a technical issue, right? If your older family member is in a nursing home, you should want the corporate executive who is making those kinds of corporate decisions to have to fear legal consequences if they make decisions that endanger your family member's life. And that's what Cuomo slipped into the budget, which was to say to those corporate executives, at the behest of his big donor, you don't have to worry about those consequences.
Yeah, sorry. No. I just thought that was a really brilliant point, because usually people get caught up in they're getting immunity because they're just greedy corporate people. But no, that disincentivizes them to doing their job, and people's lives are on the line. I mean, we talk about moral hazard all the time, where we talk about giving people like health insurance and stuff. I can't think of a bigger moral hazard than saying a bunch of corporations who are in charge of the life and death of, thousands of people, and saying, you know what, you're not going to be held responsible for anything that happens.
And the amazing thing is, and Ron, you should talk about it, which is that Ron put out a report after the immunity provision was slipped into the law, he put out a report detailing the potential effects of this in his effort, as we reported, to try to repeal the immunity. And Ron, tell him about what you found in that report.
Yeah, we did 3 total reports. In the first report we published in May, we gathered all the data around the country and looked at all the states that had similar provisions of legal immunity, New York being the golden standard, the worst of its kind. And there were about 20 states that had that, and 77% of all the fatalities came from those 20 states. There's the states with the worst legal immunity, the highest number of deaths. So we proved early that there's a direct correlation, especially in a place like New York, when it's 65% of the industry are for-profits. These are private for-profit corporations. They have a fiduciary duty at every quarter to report back to the shareholders profits. And those are the people that Governor Cuomo gave a legal immunity, and we called it out. And we'll get into why the cover-up is now tied deeply into this. And that's really the core of the cover-up, because if we had real-time information and data, we would have been able to repeal legal immunity. I had a bill, a bunch of senators pushed for it. We were now getting it out there, but all of a sudden, the data decreased by 50%. Or I don't know exactly when, I think around May or June, they decoupled people who died from hospitals and from nursing home residents. So think about what they did. So if you're a nursing home resident and you're sick and you're transferred to a hospital and died in a hospital, they stopped counting that death toward nursing home residents. So all of a sudden the numbers decreased by 50%. New York doesn't look that bad. They're like, oh, we're number 38. He kept saying that in the press conference. But I'm like, Governor, that's not right. Give us all the data. You have it. Excuse after excuse. The software doesn't match up. The hospital number, the initials doesn't match up. The number of lies that went in to cover that up was amazing. And that's why they covered it up, because if we had the data, we would have legislated and gotten our repealing the immunity retroactively, and that would have impacted his business donors that supported his campaigns in the past.
Secretary to the Governor, when she's cornered, she says, oh, we didn't want to give the numbers because we didn't want Trump to attack us and use that to not give us resources and funds. So what is your response to that claim?
Well, we were texting, because we realized what just happened. And we also had outside observers. We were allowed to have one staff member to observe the meeting. So we're just trying to, and then the meeting continued. That was, we had another hour after that. But right up to that moment, Katie, it was because they're giving us the same excuses. And my colleagues were like, not good enough. Enough with your bullshit. I don't want to hear it. Can I curse? I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Please.
And then Melissa is like, you want the truth. This is what happened. And then she went off for about a minute and a half, admitting that there was a cover-up. The first time they admitted that there was a cover-up. They took away my right to legislate. I have a job to do. I have the job to protect my constituents, by not disclosing the data, I couldn't do my job to save my people who died unnecessarily in the last 10 months.
David, you want to respond to that?
I mean, Ron's exactly right. The only thing I would say is that, the argument from Cuomo's aides can be both right. They can speak a political truth, but they are not a legal truth. By that I mean, the quote from Melissa DeRosa, Cuomo's top aide, was when asked by the legislators, why did you not release this information? Was, quote, we froze because then we were in a position where we weren't sure if what we were going to give to the Department of Justice or what we were going to give to you guys, she's speaking to the legislators, to you guys, what we start saying was going to be used against us while we weren't sure if there was going to be an investigation. Now, it's the point I would make is that it's certainly true that the top of Trump's Justice Department was politicized. But so it's true that a politicized Justice Department may be more inclined to use a politicized Republican-run Justice Department, may be more inclined to use incriminating information against a Democratic governor. But that's not a legal rationale for withholding information from that Justice Department or from state legislators. That's obstruction of justice. Like, you can't just run into court and be like, hey, I didn't give up the information because the prosecutor was mean or was going to be mean to me. Like, that's not a rationale. Like, that's not a legal rationale, even though again, you can stipulate that it may be politically true that Donald Trump's Justice Department is politicized. It still is not a legal rationale for saying we're not going to release information about a death toll in nursing homes in our state, right? Like, that is almost classic obstruction of justice kind of behavior. And the point about the context here is that in the context of withholding the information at a time when you are doing the bidding of your donor who has asked you to give corporate immunity to nursing home executives. We're going to give nursing homes a liability shield from lawsuits about nursing home deaths, while we're also going to hide and withhold nursing home death information from public officials, right? It's like you put the data points on a table and it starts to look like motive. Now, was that the only motive? We don't know. Was part of the motive that Cuomo himself just didn't want to look like he was overseeing an absolute disaster while he was promoting a book, while he was being on CNN giving kind of a recurring slot, he was getting an Emmy, he was the media golden boy. I mean, all these things maybe it was all those things at once. But the point is that you have the withholding of information plus the motive of you're doing the bidding of your huge donor who wants to immunize, to grant a liability shield to the executives in the middle of this, right? That's the definition of not acting in the public interest.
Right. That's the irony. It's like, it's not a legal excuse, obviously, but it's also hard to take it seriously as like, oh, you're really just cutting out all corners, whatever you can do to save lives. Like, no, that's obviously, and at the same time, you're coincidentally giving immunity. And the irony of the word immunity in this context, when we're talking about a virus also, is just like kind of striking. But I thought that also kind of, I don't know if she planned this. Like, I don't know if she planned to say, oh, we were protecting ourselves from Trump weaponizing this information, but it was so perfect because I've said this a bunch on this show and on Useful Idiots with Matt Taibbi, and that like the difference between, well, there are many differences between Trump and Cuomo, but the only thing that Cuomo needed to do to be turned into a hero was not say something like inject bleach into your lungs and sound rational, right? And sound in control. And that was it. And it actually is kind of true. And it also speaks to the way that the but Trump framing was so dangerous because it was literally anything that's not Trump is permissible or better than the alternative. And this is a case where, no, like this wasn't, this is stuff that people would expect from Trump and would rightly condemn Trump for. But it's someone who's a Democrat who, tends to be good on social issues. By the way, we should definitely cut in here later if we edit this into something shorter. But Cuomo saying, as a New Yorker, I'm a Jew. I'm a gay man. I'm a lesbian. I'm black. Leslie, do you know about this? Your face didn't have that. Yeah, we'll find it later and we'll put it in. He said it multiple times. Anyway, it's really good. He deserved that Emmy, guys. He deserved it because I believed him. And he deserved that Emmy because he was able to trick people for so long about, being much, much, much better than Trump.
Well, it's easy to trick people when your brother is on national news for 8 hours a day.
Yeah, another
pretty
conflict
easy
of interest. Yeah.